want it to be a little more interactive. So I like your questions, and just interrupt me whenever you feel like you want to ask questions and so on, okay? This is a relatively small crowd, so I'm happy to do it that way. So I'm going to talk about the smart city in general. I work for NIST. It's a National Institute of Standards and Technology. How many of you have heard of the agency called the NIST, except the ones working for the agency? So don't. Just two. Okay, 3, 4. So relatively small crowd. So we are part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. So we are essentially a research arm of the Commerce Department. We specialize in measurement science and standards. So you may think that, okay, what kind of standards are we talking about? Time, length, weight, any kind of like those physical characteristics. And the other end of the spectrum, cybersecurity, internet, and smart city, for example. And Internet of Things, cyber physical systems, all those. So just give you an idea about why I'm here, why I'm even talking about smart cities in general. Okay, then let's see how I can move the slides. Great. So let me first talk about IoT in general. How many of you have heard about the term called IoT? Internet of Things. Wow, we came a long way from 4 years ago. When I asked this question 4 years ago, probably a couple of them in the room. Yeah, maybe. Very small number. Not many people even knew what IoT was. So Internet of Things, as a concept, is actually pretty simple. It's about connecting devices and hardware and extract useful information and provide a decision to the system and take control of the system. That's what it is. So there's physical systems like sensors and actuators that could be cars, airplanes, drones, anything that you can touch. There's communications and there are data analytics. And on top of it, there's a service layer, which make decisions basically. So probably you ever heard this kind of like a hype type of things before. Everybody says data is the new blood. Data is the new currency. I only agree with half of it because data itself has no value. It's ones and zeros. It's numbers. There's nothing there. You can extract value from the data only when you convert it into actionable information, okay? So once you do data crunching and analytics and all that, and now you have some information that you understand what the system does, and then how you can act on it. That's when the real value is created. That's where the service layer is so important. That's why if you see the information flow, that's actually not one directional. That's a two-directional, bi-directional data flow. This is important. So why is this important? This chart is important. Oh, by the way, this is not exactly like, there are a lot of different definitions of IoT, so this is just one example of how we look at it. Now, once you superimpose this structure onto a city or community, that becomes a smart city, okay? So that's easy to visualize, that's easy to think about it. Now, there are 3 categories of IoT. If you apply this concept to consumer, like smartwatch or your jogging device, that becomes a consumer IoT. If you apply to the factory, if you apply to the more of a nuclear plant type of application, that becomes the industrial IoT. If you apply to public sector, that becomes a smart cities and smart communities. Now we have a big problem. How many of you, how many of you heard about smart city concept before 5 years ago? Not today, but before 5 years ago. Okay, very small number. The reason is this smart city discussion hasn't really started in the United States until about 4 or 5 years ago. Does it mean that it hasn't existed? No, it existed for a long time. Every municipal government wanted to make their city smart. No city wanted to be a dumb city, okay? So, however, there is a problem. Why are we not seeing the level of the adoption that we are trying to see today? Because most of the smart city projects are fragmented, siloed, custom tailored, no consensus, no convergence, no standards. So every city, they do their own thing, and maybe the two cities just right next to each other, they don't even know what each other's doing. Here's a big problem. Any industry or any sector, if you think about it, they cannot grow exponentially if every project is the custom tailored project. Companies will not going to be able to make a product that's going to scale. All right, with that, if every company has to go to every city and they have the project, a custom design product one by one, you're going to never see this hockey stick. So the problem is a lot of these are one-offs. As a result, many of smart cities deployments are isolated and do not enjoy the economies of scale. This is the big problem, and we want to change that. And that's why we at NIST, we are studying it, and we are working on helping the innovators to solve these problems. And that's why I'm here speaking in this crowdsource community. Now, so we created a program called the Global City Teams Challenge. It has been about 4 years. Now this year, we are partnering with the US Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology Directorate. That's why you see the logo over there. The goal is pretty simple. Establish, demonstrate replicable and scalable and sustainable model for collaborated innovation and development for a smart city, okay? With the goal to have tangible, measurable benefits. Now, this is important. You may also see a lot of the smart city projects and say, this is fancy. You have a great website and all that. But how many of you actually feel that benefit every day, okay? The problem of a lot of these projects are they pour money into these projects, but they do not really provide a tangible benefit every day. So I would be happy to see a smart city project that cuts my commute time by half. That's a big deal. I say if I come into Washington, D.C., I drove about 45 minutes today and spent about 15 minutes to find a parking. There's a survey actually. This is a big city situation. About 30% of the cars in New York City at any time of the day is looking for a parking. Think about it. 45 minutes drive and 15 minutes parking, that's what it is. So if you can cut that to by like 30%, 40%, that's a tangible benefit. That's the type of projects we want to identify and make it replicable and scalable and sustainable. That's the whole point here. Now, how do I do it? Easier said than done. This is exactly how we do it. Instead of each city working with each company one by one, we want to group them with a coalesce them around a concept called action clusters. So instead of a single project being deployed, we want to sort of bring those different types of projects that share the same goal. Autonomous vehicles, traffic congestion, parking, renewable energy, emergency response, whatever that is. Naturally, we are hoping that outcome of these projects, since they're collaboration between multiple cities, multiple innovators, we're going to be more applicable, the broader adoption, more replicable and scalable. That's the way we want to do it. And we're going to talk about superclusters in a while, but let's just skip it for now. So over the course of the last 4 years, we have identified, incubated, nurtured about 200, a little bit more than 200 projects around the world. So every project has to have a city partner. That's the requirement. So this is important as well because a lot of companies and universities say, I have the best technology in the world. I'm going to solve the world's problems. Okay, and you see thousands and thousands of them. But when you go to actually apply to the real city, you face a lot of problems you have not thought about before. So that's why you need the city partners to come in and look at from their perspective, not from innovators' perspectives only. This is important piece of the requirement, and that's why a lot of projects come out of it are, again, replicable and adoptable by two other cities. So these are if you look at it, there are big cities like New York City, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., so on. But there are small cities like Greenville, South Carolina, Winooski, Vermont. How many of you have even heard of a city called Winooski, Vermont? Wow, are you from that town? My daughter. Okay, there's about, say, 12,000 people probably. A small city, relatively. Schenectady, New York City. Has any of you heard of a city called Schenectady, New York? No, okay, that's another small city doing great job. Now, it's not just the US. We're talking about sustainability, sustainable projects. We're talking about standards. It has to be a global process because we cannot just come with one standard that works in the United States and expect that will be adopted by broader population. So we work with the Europeans, we work with the Asians, we work with anybody in the world that has shared the same vision. So roughly about 60% of the cities participating are from the US, the other 40% are from the outside of the US. And every one of these projects includes innovators. That includes companies, universities, nonprofits who bring in technologies on the table. So we have over 400 companies, universities, nonprofits, government agencies participating. So now, we are NIST. We love convergence. We love standards. So how do we create convergence out of this process? This is exactly how we do it. We start with all these discrete projects or action clusters. That's what we call it. That's on the bottom. Companies, projects, blah, blah, blah. Now, we funnel them into sort of a bottom-up process. And then we create a concept called the supercluster. Essentially, it's an aggregation of the projects in a similar sector, like transportation, data, or public safety, and so on. And it's almost like a crowdsourcing process to identify the best practices. That's what it really is. So go through this process. So out of this 200 plus projects around the world, we aggregate them into 7 different superclusters: transportation, public safety, utility, wireless, data, agriculture, and rural. Now, why agriculture and rural? You may ask, that's not exactly a city. Well, I saw this statistic before. More than half of the population, world population, they say, will live in the city by, say, 2025 or something. I forgot exactly the year. And everybody is rushing to make that happen. But think about it. What that means is about half of the population will still live in rural area even by 2025. What about them? That's an important piece. And there's a lot of room to grow. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit in those rural areas. By adopting new technologies, they can make their lives better. That's why this is important. So that's why we call it smart cities and communities, not just smart cities. We also have an education supercluster. It's sort of like a new one. We are trying to also educate, not just a public perspective, but also K-12 and universities. Because guess what? Smart city is not going to be done overnight. It's going to take decades. Okay? This is a huge initiative that's going on around the world. In 30 years, I'm not going to be the one who's going to be developing and deploying, innovating those solutions. That's going to be the folks in elementary school, middle school right now, who's going to learn about smart city, learn about IoT, learn about standards. That's why this education supercluster is also important. So, NIST cannot do it by ourselves. So we work with virtually every organization share the same vision. Other agencies like DHS, NTIA, National Science Foundation, ITA, NITRO, and so on. Also, nonprofits, a lot of nonprofits, this is just partial list. And also private sector companies, and also central governments of Italy, Netherlands, South Korea, and Japan around the world. And there are about 15 countries that send their cities to this program. But these 4 countries are the ones at the central government level we collaborate with them. Now, so probably, I have about 5 minutes, I guess. Yeah, so I'm going to give you a few examples. So great concept. So what are really the meats here? So I'll give you a few examples of what we have nurtured and identified so far. So StormSense project, that's a collaboration of 12 cities and towns in Southern Virginia to come up with a common solution to predict flooding. You may think, flooding, what a big deal. I mean, and you know how it flood. That's not the case. Sometimes, depending on the characteristics of the flood, some streets may fill up in almost like a couple of hours, and you cannot even evacuate yourself. That happens. So it's very important to know at the local level, at the street level, what is the expected flooding pattern that's going to happen in the next 6 hours, for example. That's what they're trying to do. It's an interesting project. At the technical level, what they do is they have this water sensors all over the town, and then they bring that up to a cloud system, and they have an interesting data analytics, and we don't want to call it AI, but data analytics platform that actually does prediction for that kind of flooding. Now, bottom left is called Link NYC. There are about 8,000 payphones in New York City right now. 8,000. How many of you ever used a payphone in the last 6 months? Raise your hands. None? Oh, come on, you guys all bring your cell phones. This is kind of like techie crowd, I knew it. So, but there are still 8,000 payphones in New York City, and it's barely used. And the real estate is owned by the city. It's basically waste of real estate. So what they did was they made an agreement with a consortium of private sector companies to replace the payphone booth with something called the Link. It's a kiosk, which is about 10 feet high, with a huge LCD display that displays the advertisement to generate revenue. And then it provides free Wi-Fi to anybody around that area. Plus, it also has a humidity sensor, temperature sensor, noise sensor, which is a big problem in New York City, to get the vital signs of the city 24/7. And city doesn't pay a dime because the revenue comes out of it, they split between the city and also the consortium. So, as a successful concept, is being replicated in many other cities in the world. Now, Greenville, small city, very rural area, they have a problem called the first and last mile challenge. So probably you don't have the problem in the Washington, D.C. or New York City because subway stations are everywhere. But here, even if you have a bus stop, you still have to walk about a mile or two to get to your home because bus stops are not that close to each other. So what it means is that whoever goes to work has to walk a couple miles a day. Not a big deal, good exercise. Think about the rainy day. Think about the folks who do not want to walk. That's a long walk. So the idea is use autonomous vehicles to fill up the gap. That's called the last mile, first mile problem. And that's not the only problem for Greenville. It's a problem for a lot of cities and towns around around the nation. So this is an interesting project. We incubated, we nurtured it, and then they finally got $4 million grant from U.S. Department of Transportation last year. So we did not give the grant. By the way, this is not a funding program. We are essentially a crowdsourcing innovation and nurturing program. But there are a lot of funding sources out there, whether it's a federal agency or private sector, venture capitals. They come in and pick up what we help them to come into shape. That's what they do. Other projects, autonomous vehicles. You probably have seen the slow-moving shuttles, autonomous shuttles. Looks like a box, and it's called, about 30 miles. That was initially piloted by U.S. Army 4 years ago. The use case was when in the battlefield, when a soldier is wounded, you do not want to send another soldier, a driver, to pick up the wounded soldier and bring back because you are putting another soldier at risk. So the idea is send an autonomous vehicle to the field and somehow bring that lift the wounded soldier, bring back to the field, the hospital autonomously. That was the concept. It didn't really go very far in the Army application, but it found a commercial application. That's what that is for. There's other stuff like water, and there's a data system and so on. I'm not gonna go through all that. So now let me talk about cybersecurity and privacy a little bit. Now we have nurtured a lot of projects for the last 2 years, and now we are at the inflection point that a lot of these projects are getting into mass market and really being deployed. We have a problem. A lot of these projects are designed not with a lot of consideration for security and privacy issues. Think about it. These sensors, this communication system spread all over the world. And you hear a lot of the horror stories about somebody hacks into, and this is known virus attack that happened that used the surveillance cameras, 500,000 surveillance cameras as a zombie device to do DDoS attack that happened 2 or 3 years ago. That was real. So what we want to do is we want to partner with, we want it, and we are doing it, with a DHS SNT. By the way, DHS has a huge group for cybersecurity. They have decades of experience and expertise in cybersecurity, as well as NIST does. But we bring in these community projects, and we marry them with a DHS expertise. We create a more of a smart and secure challenge program that we are running right now. We are about 8 months into this program. We're going to conclude this over here, February 20th and 22nd. This is an annual process. This process is more of like, you start with a kickoff, and then you nurture them and create the excitement, create the momentum, and in 12 to 14 months, you conclude them. So we don't want to drag this forever. So we bring those projects to a culmination event and let them show off what they've got, and let them share their, essentially, it's almost like a crowdsourcing of the solutions and identifying the best practices out of it. So we typically have about 1,500 people at this event and all that. Just Washington Convention Center next year. It's a free, anybody can come in, and we can even exhibit if they want. We all give this space for free. This is a very high-profile event. Actually, it's the largest smart city community event hosted by the U.S. federal government. Why is this important? Because you may think, why smart city is done by federal government? Well, we don't run cities. But a lot of cities do their best, but they do not know what other cities are. They do not share these things. That's where federal government comes in and facilitate and create best practices and then facilitate them, which hopefully we're going to lead into standards and measurement science. That's why we do this. There's more information. If you have questions and so on, let me know. Websites, bunch of information. Thank you very much. I hope I'm okay with the time.
Yeah, we have time for one question, two. Anyone has a question? Or
yeah.
Question. You were talking about how the federal government is interacting with the rest of the world in terms of smart cities. We at the Greater Washington Board of Trade have been working on smart cities and how we've looked at things, but the interaction between the federal government and what we're doing in the private sector, I don't think we're still there yet. It seems like we're missing that bridge.
Well, if that is already done, I don't have to run this program. Yes, you are absolutely correct. So there are a lot of different reasons. Smart cities at the end of the day has to involve companies who has muscles to actually do those projects. And sometimes they just want to do it on their own, and they just don't look at federal government as a helper. They kind of sometimes look at it as a regulator or sometimes a roadblock. That's where I come in. And then this program is kind of like, we are not trying to regulate anything. NIST is not a regulating body. We are a research community. We are a research agency. So we are sort of like a neutral position to help the private sector to facilitate and convene with others as well. So you are absolutely right. That's still the no perfect solution, but that's why we are running these type of programs.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.